The last thing my mother ever said to me before slamming the door was, "If you bring that child into this family, don't ever come back." My name is Frances. I'm 40 years old, and 14 years ago, I chose a little girl over the people who raised me. I have never regretted it. Not once. But I would be lying if I said it didn't hurt. At 26, I wasn't married. No husband. No perfect suburban life. Just a small apartment, a stable job, and a quiet ache every time I thought about home. I worked as a social worker back then. Mostly foster care cases. Which meant, every day, I met children nobody wanted to keep. Children who learned too early that adults could disappear. Most people think foster care stories are dramatic. Some are. But honestly, the saddest ones are quiet. Children sitting silently during meetings. Children pretending not to care when placements fail. Children packing their belongings into trash bags like it's normal. And then there was Ava, 3 years old. Tiny, curly brown hair, big watchful eyes. She barely spoke when I first met her. Not because she couldn't, because she had already learned silence was safer. Her foster placement had collapsed after 11 months. Attachment issues, one report said. No. Abandonment issues. There's a difference. I still remember the first time she held my hand. Not tightly. Tentatively. Like she expected me to let go eventually. And honestly, that broke something inside me. Over the next year, I kept finding excuses to check on her case. Then one afternoon, another placement failed. And suddenly, before I fully understood what I was saying, I heard myself ask, what would it take for me to adopt her? People think life-changing decisions feel dramatic. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they feel calm, quiet, certain. My parents did not feel the same way. When I told them, my mother stared at me like I had confessed a crime. "You're serious?" she asked. "Yes." "At your age?" I almost laughed. 26. As if motherhood expired at 30. But that wasn't really her issue. "What about your future?" she demanded. "What about marriage?" I looked at her quietly. "Ava is my future." That's when my father spoke for the first time. "You're ruining your life for someone else's mistake." Mistake. Imagine calling a child that. I should tell you I expected resistance. But not cruelty. Not from them. My mother cried for 2 straight days. Not because she feared for me. Because she was embarrassed. "What'll people think?" she kept asking. Funny how some people care more about public opinion than private morality. The adoption process took almost 11 months. Home studies. Background checks. Paperwork. Court dates. And through all of it, my parents kept trying to stop me. "You'll regret this. No man will want this responsibility. You don't even know her real background." As if love required genetic proof. The day the adoption finalized, I thought maybe they would soften. Maybe seeing Ava officially become my daughter would awaken something human in them. Instead, my mother handed me an envelope. White. Plain. Cold. "Read it later," she said. "No hug. No congratulations. Just distance." I opened it in my car. And even now, 14 years later, I can still remember every word. "Frances, if you go through with this, you are choosing a stranger over your real family. That child is someone else's mistake, and we will not spend our lives pretending otherwise. Do not bring her to our home. Do not expect us to accept this. And if this adoption means more to you than your parents do, then perhaps you should not come back at all. No love. No hesitation. Just rejection written neatly in my mother's handwriting. I cried so hard that day. I had to pull the car over twice. Not because I doubted adopting Ava. Never that. I cried because grief is complicated. You can lose people, even while making the best decision of your life. That night, I carried Ava into our apartment to sleep. Tiny arms wrapped around my neck. Warm little breaths against my shoulder. And standing there in the dark, I made myself a promise. She would never feel unwanted again. Not while I was alive. The years that followed were not easy. Single motherhood rarely is. I worked long hours, budgeted everything carefully, skipped vacations, skipped luxuries. But somehow, our apartment always felt full. Laughter, movie nights, school projects on the kitchen table. Ava grew quickly. By 6, she loved books. By 9, she corrected my grammar. By 11, she was reading history documentaries for fun. And every single year, I loved her more. Not despite the challenges. Because of them. Meanwhile, my parents stayed gone. Birthdays passed. Holidays passed. Graduations passed. Nothing. Sometimes, my mother mailed short cards without return addresses. Hope you're well. Never. How's Ava? Because acknowledging her fully would require admitting they were wrong. Then something changed when Ava turned 13. Suddenly, my parents reappeared. Not emotionally. Strategically. My father called first. We've been thinking maybe it's time to reconnect. Reconnect. Interesting word for people who abandoned you. Then came invitations. Holiday suggestions. At first, I was suspicious. Then I found out why. Ava had become well known at school. Straight A's. Debate competitions. Academic awards. Teachers adored her. Parents praised her constantly. And my parents? They suddenly wanted proximity to success. Funny how some people reject children until those children become impressive. I kept my distance carefully. But Ava? She was curious about them. Of course she was. She was 14. Kind-hearted. Hopeful. Children naturally want to believe adults can improve. So slowly, carefully, I allowed limited contact. Lunches. Short visits. School events. And honestly, watching my parents suddenly act proud of her made something inside me ache. Because where was this warmth 14 years ago? Where was this love when she was a frightened 3-year-old needing a family? Then came the middle school graduation. 300 people filled the auditorium. Parents taking photos. Flowers everywhere. Excited voices echoing through the halls. Ava had been chosen valedictorian. And I could not stop smiling. Because after everything, after all the rejection, after every cruel prediction, that little girl nobody wanted stood at the top of her class. My parents arrived early, dressed perfectly, smiling proudly. My mother even told another parent, "Our granddaughter has always been exceptional." I nearly dropped my coffee. Always? No. Not always. Only once success made her convenient. The ceremony began. Students walked across the stage one by one. Families applauded. Then finally, Ava approached the podium. And from the second she touched the microphone, I knew something was different. Because she looked nervous. Not speech nervous. Emotionally nervous. She unfolded a piece of paper slowly. And suddenly, my stomach tightened. Because I recognized the paper instantly. White. Folded carefully. Worn at the edges. My mother's letter. And, before I could even breathe properly, Ava looked directly toward my parents and began to read. The auditorium became so quiet, you could hear paper moving in people's hands. 300 people. Parents. Teachers. Students. And my 14-year-old daughter, standing beneath bright stage lights, holding the letter that nearly destroyed me. For one terrible second, I thought about stopping her. Not because she was wrong, because I knew exactly how painful those words were. And hearing them out loud, that kind of truth changes rooms forever. Ava adjusted the microphone slightly. Her hands trembled just a little. Then she began reading. Francis, if you go through with this, you are choosing a stranger over your real family. A soft murmur moved through the audience instantly. I looked toward my parents. My mother's face drained of color. My father sat frozen. And Ava kept reading. That child is someone else's mistake. The silence after those words felt violent. Not loud. Worse. Heavy. Unavoidable. A teacher near the front lowered her program slowly. Another parent covered her mouth. Because cruelty sounds different when spoken publicly, especially when directed at a child. Ava's voice shook slightly now. But she continued, "Do not bring her to our home." I could barely breathe. Not because I was ashamed, because 14 years earlier, I had read those same words alone in a parked car, wondering if choosing love would cost me everything. And now the child they rejected stood on a stage proving exactly what love had created. Ava lowered the letter carefully. Then she looked directly at the audience. "I found this letter last year," she said softly. Every eye in the room stayed fixed on her. "I wasn't supposed to." She glanced toward me briefly. And honestly, I understand why my mom hid it. My throat tightened instantly. She didn't want me to feel unwanted. There it was. The truth beneath everything. Not anger. Not revenge. Protection. Ava smiled sadly. "But the thing is,"
She paused.
"I never felt unwanted." A few people in the audience visibly wiped tears away. Because children know the difference between being tolerated and being loved. "My mom adopted me when nobody else stayed," Ava continued. "She worked double shifts. She helped with homework after exhausting days. She sat through nightmares. She packed lunches. She never once made me feel like I ruined her life." My vision blurred completely. Because no achievement in my life,
No promotion. No recognition.
had ever mattered more than hearing that child say those words. Ava looked down at the letter again. "People say blood makes a family," she said quietly. Then she folded the paper carefully. "But love is what kept ours alive." The room erupted into applause. Not polite applause. Not ceremony applause. Real applause. Emotional applause. The kind people give when truth hits them directly in the heart. I looked toward my parents again. My mother was crying openly now. But strangely, I felt calm. Not triumphant. Not vindictive. Just clear. Because after 14 years, the truth no longer lived hidden in a drawer. It stood under bright lights where everyone could see it. And somehow, that felt freeing. Ava raised her hand slightly, asking for quiet again. The applause slowly faded. "There's one more thing," she said softly. Oh no. That was my first thought. Not fear for myself. Fear for her. Because brave children often carry emotional burdens too early. She looked toward my parents directly now. The grandparents who suddenly appeared. Once she became successful enough to claim. And then she said the sentence. That changed everything forever. "You don't get to reject someone when they're small." She inhaled shakily. "And claim them once they shine." Complete silence. Absolute silence. Even the air felt still. My father looked like someone had physically struck him. My mother lowered her face into her hands. And for the first time in their lives, they could not escape the consequences of their own words. Not because anyone screamed at them. Because truth had finally arrived publicly. And truth does not need volume to devastate people. Ava smiled softly then. Not cruelly. Not bitterly. Just honestly. "My mother taught me something important," she said. She looked directly at me. "That family is the people who stay." I broke completely after that. Quiet tears. Hands trembling. Heart overflowing in ways I cannot even explain. Because 14 years earlier, I thought I was rescuing her. But somewhere along the way, she rescued me too. The audience stood to applaud. Teachers. Parents. Students. 300 people rising to their feet. For the child once described as someone else's mistake. And honestly, that moment healed something inside me. I didn't realize was still bleeding. After the ceremony ended, dozens of people approached Ava. Compliments.
Praise. Tears.
Several teachers hugged her tightly. One older woman stopped beside me and whispered, "You raised an extraordinary girl."
No.
Love raised her. Consistent love. Safe love. Patient love. That is what transforms children. Eventually, my parents approached us slowly. My mother's makeup was ruined from crying. My father looked smaller somehow. Quieter. And suddenly, they looked exactly like what they were. Two people finally forced to face the damage they caused. My mother tried speaking first. Frances. But her voice cracked immediately. I was wrong, she whispered. Simple words. Late words. But real. My father nodded beside her. We were ashamed back then, he admitted quietly. Ashamed. Funny. Because the only shameful thing in the story was how easily they abandoned love when it arrived differently than expected. Ava stood beside me silently, listening carefully. And in that moment, I realized something important. Children watch how we respond to pain. They learn boundaries from us, self-respect from us, forgiveness from us. So I took a slow breath and answered honestly. You missed 14 years, I said softly. Neither of them responded, because there was nothing to argue with. You cannot recover lost childhoods. You cannot relive birthdays. You cannot repair absences completely. Some damage stays visible forever. But still, I looked at them calmly. I don't hate you, I continued. And I meant it. Hatred requires emotional attachment. And somewhere over the years, mine had quietly dissolved. But access to our lives is no longer automatic. My mother cried harder after that. Not because I yelled. Not because I punished her. Because boundaries spoken calmly often hurt more than anger. Ava reached for my hand gently. And, together, we walked away from them. Not dramatically. Not cruelly. Just peacefully. Outside the school, the evening sun painted everything gold. Families took pictures nearby. Children laughed. Flowers swayed softly in the wind. And suddenly, I remembered the terrified 26-year-old woman sitting alone in a car with a rejection letter. She thought she had lost everything that day. But she was wrong. She had just begun building something better. As we reached the parking lot, Ava squeezed my hand. You okay? She asked softly.
I smilede her.
Really smiled. More than okay. Because sometimes, the greatest revenge is not destroying the people who hurt you. It's raising someone so loved, they become brave enough to speak truth without fear. And that little girl once called someone else's mistake? She became the best thing that ever happened to me